Bienvenidos al Cinematógrafo. Hoy tenemos un programa nuevamente especial. Habíamos hecho uno en la casa de Carlos Reigadas, donde en el set de Post Tenebras Lux tratábamos de entender cómo había hecho aquella película, la escena en particular del inicio, y hablábamos además del cine en general y de su experiencia en la escuela de Belatar. Hoy nos vamos a dedicar a reunir nuevamente a Reigadas, a Lisandro Alonso, que ya pasaron por el programa, y además a Simon Field, que es uno de los grandes inventores o los que de algún modo redefinieron los festivales de cine a fines del siglo XX y que de algún modo todos los festivales que vinieron después fueron de algún modo tocados por la mirada de Simon Field, que fue quien reinventó el Festival de Rotterdam y que fue precisamente ese festival el que le dio su estructura y su idea general al Bafisi, entre otros. Vamos a hablar con Simon Field, vamos a pensar los festivales y el especial de hoy prácticamente está dedicado a entender qué importancia tienen hoy los festivales de cine. Estamos aquí con una de las personas claves de lo que fue el paso del siglo XX al XXI en materia de cine, fundamentalmente en festivales. El Bafisi, por ejemplo, tomó su estructura, su modelo de lo que fue en su momento el Rotterdam, que de algún modo Simon Field concibió o refundó en algún sentido cuando estaba a su cargo. Vamos a hablar de eso y vamos a hablar también de... Es él quien produce las películas en la actualidad de Apichapón Veracetakul. Es para nosotros un honor tener a Simon. I won't repeat what I said, but you more or less can figure out. First of all, I would like to know a little bit the moment that you start working in Rotterdam Film Festival, because as much as I know and people from Argentina know, you were a key figure in a kind of reshaping the Rotterdam Film Festival, and I think it was, even for the Bafisi first directors, you were a kind of model to be followed, like Rotterdam and the way that you conceived that festival. I would like to reconsider that story, to know a little bit more about it, and to go on.
Okay, so I think the first thing to say is that I came to Rotterdam from the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London, where I'd been programming and running the cinema for eight years, and it was distribution and programming a cinema. And it was involved in, particularly thanks to a critic in the UK, Tony Raines, we were working a lot with the new Chinese cinema, the fifth generation, with new Japanese cinema. And I think Rotterdam felt that I had the sort of experience that they would like to have me come to take over a festival that had a very strong position, a very strong tradition. It had a legendary first director, Hubert Bals, who left his name to the Hubert Bals Fund. He, in a sense, was a sort of shadow over the festival when I arrived. It had been changed a lot since he left, since he died, particularly by my precursor, Emile Fallot, who made it much more popular, improved the marketing, and I think what I was able to do, luckily enough, was to consolidate the tradition of Bals in a bigger festival, which was to think about the structure of the programming, a lot of the elements of the festival were in place. The Tiger competition, the Cinemart, those sorts of things, which had been very strong, or particularly the cinema, a very strong initiative. The Hubert Bals Fund was in place, so there was the idea of supporting filmmakers and also helping to finance films from developing countries. I think what I felt, I'm not sure that I really changed that much in terms of the programming, but what I was able to do was to, I hope, give a sense of passion to the programming, to think about how you had to edit a number of curators in a big festival, and to introduce several things which I see are also here in Ficunam, and which Bafici also did, but on a bigger scale, which is to have filmmakers in focus. To choose 3 people from different aspects of cinema that offered, that in a sense were figures who one had to not forget because they were an important part of the makeup of the thinking about the festival. And the other thing that we were able to do, which was, I think, very important, and was the question partly of timing, but also of my own interest, was to expand what was called the expanded cinema. And that had several faces to it, which were quite different. One was, shall we say, the consequences of the digital revolution, the ways in which festivals, or certainly within the program there, because of Femke Volting, who was doing the programming, a young programmer, she wanted to incorporate, along with actually Kees Cassander, who was Peter Greenaway's producer, but was involved in initiating this part of the festival, to start putting things into the festival, like commercials, like all the aspects of digital cinema and the new media in which they were appearing. My particular interest was more in the relationship with the visual arts, partly out of a personal history, I suppose. And because of the nature of the festival, we were able to, or the location of the festival, in a city that had the Boymans Museum, the Witte de Wit, several places in which we were able to have collaborations and immediately start to showcase the possibility that cinema could be found in the newly emerging gallery space, not the newly emerging spaces, but that cinema was beginning to find its way into those spaces. And one of the other things we did as part of that was to initiate a series called What is Cinema? Because precisely that was the time when it seemed important to raise that question, not in relation to Bazin's idea of what is cinema, but where cinema was to be found, what forms it was taking.
Yes, ontologically.
Yeah, yeah.
And now that you have been a little bit detached by the world of the festivals, although you are still being invited as a jury in many festivals, how is your perspective about festivals? There is something is changing, I think. Market festival, every festival has its market. It seems to be that something is going on. It's undergoing a kind of transformation, which I think it's a little bit far from what you had in perspective at the end of the century with the Rotterdam Film Festival. How is you perceive?
You touch on enormous issues, I think, because we have to also bear in mind that festivals are very different things. I know that a Cannes or a Toronto or a Venice is different in quite substantial ways from a Rotterdam or Locarno, but both have to deal with, I suppose, with the relationship with distributors, the release patterns, the idea that I talked about in one interview, the idea that you have this sandwich theory in which you have to have certain films that draw in the audience in order to be able to do the other films. So you need the premieres, you need, in a way, even in a festival like Rotterdam, you need the press, you need sponsorship, and you get all caught up in the sort of necessities of having to accommodate those while trying to hold on to a principled program. And for me, it's very interesting to see Bafici, that I know less well now because I went to the early years, but to be here in Ficunam, because those are both festivals which manage to stay out to some extent of those issues. Ficunam has stayed, I mean, it's young, but it's determined to stay small, be clear about its programming. That doesn't really answer your question. I think one of the reasons that I was happy to leave Rotterdam and to start doing production.
Un honor tener a Simon Field en el Cinematógrafo.
Acordate que nos podés encontrar en Facebook si te querés comunicar con nosotros, nos buscas así como el Cinematógrafo programa de televisión, y si te parece algún programa también nos colgamos en la web, lo buscas por YouTube, el Cinematógrafo TV. Quiero agradecer especialmente a Flora Male, que es quien me viste a mí, a Tienda Sixo, que es quien lo viste a Roger, y a Mirano Makeup, que es quien nos maquilla y nos deja así bien preciosos. Ahora te quiero invitar porque en el próximo bloque hay una de las entrevistas más interesantes que se han hecho aquí en el Cinematógrafo. Roger habla en exclusiva con Lisandro Alonso y Carlos Raigada, que son dos potencias cinematográficas de cine contemporáneo. Mira, no te lo pierdas.